Right, welcome, everyone. I think we're just getting started. I'm gonna wait just a moment as more people join in. Great. We're excited about the interest in this competitive solicitation. So I'll go ahead and start as we have probably a few more people joining into the webinar. I'm Allison Thompson. I'm a scientific program director here at the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research, helping on our climate smart agriculture initiatives. Today's webinar is to discuss the recent or the opportunity launched last week from the Efficient Fertilizer Consortium. It's the first request for applications, the first competitive grant opportunity from that program, which we're very excited about, and we've seen a lot of interest, and we wanted to make sure people had a chance to hear about that directly from the source. So we'll be talking about that request for applications as well as the protocol for evaluating fertilizers that it is designed to test and use. So both of those will be covered here. The links are being put in the chat, and they're also, of course, available from the Foundation for Food and Agriculture website, foundationfar.org. Go to the Efficient Fertilizer Consortium page there, and all of the information is there. So Sarah Lyons will be our main speaker. As we go, there is a Q&A functionality, so please go ahead and put any questions you have into that Q&A rather than the chat. If you can. So we'll answer some of those questions. We have a representative from our grants team online as well to help with questions. But we'll go through the material and then we'll have time for Q&A as well after that. So without further ado, Sarah Lyons is a scientific program or project manager here at FAR and has been leading on the Efficient Fertilizer Consortium and is also the lead author of the paper on the protocols for testing these products. So Sarah, take it away.
Thank you, Allison. So we're really excited about this funding opportunity, and thank you all for joining to learn a little bit more about it. So the Efficient Fertilizer Consortium was started a couple years ago now. It was first announced in 2022 as part of the Global Fertilizer Initiative, and it's a 4.5-year public-private partnership to fund research around novel fertilizer technologies and management practices, all aiming to increase fertilizer efficiency and reduce the environmental impact of fertilizers. We specialize in public-private partnerships, so we are really thrilled to have this great set of members here on the right who are providing funding for these opportunities as well. So we have about $4.5 million from the U.S. government, and then another $6 million from our external funding partners. So we have just over $10 million for this initiative. So really excited to be getting started on funding some of our first projects through this funding opportunity. And as Allison mentioned, all of the information that we'll be going over can also be found on the RFA webpage. Here's a QR code and the link. The link is also in the chat. If you know about this opportunity, you probably have already seen this website, but everything you need can be found here, including a link to start your application or access your already started application. And at the end, I also have some additional links and dates and things. But in terms of structure, I'll be going through just an overview of what we're looking for with this RFA, a very brief overview of the protocol and what's expected there. And then we'll have plenty of time to answer questions, and we'll be answering questions as you come up with them as well. So just a quick overview of some logistics about this RFA. So this is open to anyone, both international and domestic in the US. So most of our programs have to have a direct benefit to US farmers. This program is a little different. It's inherently international. So there are a list of countries that are in scope. So the research has to benefit those list of countries that I'll go through in a minute, but this is an international initiative. So a direct benefit to the US isn't necessarily required. You also can request for up to $1 million US. We are accepting smaller project as well. You don't have to request $1 million, but that's the upper limit of what you can request as far as these proposals. And another thing about this consortium that's what's somewhat different than other FAR programs is we are not requiring additional match. Our member organizations are requiring the match. Are contributing the match. So if you have match that you want to bring, we will of course welcome that. It doesn't hurt to have additional funding to boost what you're able to do, but it's not required as part of your application. And then lastly, a portion of the funding will be coming from the USDA. And to receive USDA funding, your institution has to have a SAM account. And I have a link to that website there if you're not sure or if you need to apply for one of those accounts. It's a pretty common thing. USDA funds research internationally all the time. But that's just a requirement that we wanted to make sure was front and center for you all to be aware of. And then I also have listed here the topics that are in scope. So these are kind of, the types of projects that we're looking to fund. And these were developed in partnership with our members as well. So I did, basically we're not just running a fertilizer product testing service. We are looking for creative, interesting questions about how some of these technologies work in real field settings. We want information that can benefit farmers that would be using these products. So the first one is, what's the impact of stacking some of these EEF technologies with field management practices, for our nutrient management practices, because we want to enhance the understanding of how EEFs perform in a range of conditions. Another in-scope topic could be nutrient carryover effects, particularly with rotations that may include legumes. So looking at how particularly like nitrogen would be circulating through that system is of interest. Next is identifying which EEFs work best in which places. So, a potential topic could be, looking at a type of technology in a range of climate and cropping system conditions to identify where it works best and in which situation. Next, agronomic and environmental trade-offs. So there's evidence in the literature that some of these products can maybe help reduce emissions, but we see an increase in leaching through the soil profile. So some of those trade-offs are really interesting in these products. So that's something of interest as well. And then lastly, we just wanted to make sure it was clear the types of fertilizer technologies we're interested in. We have 4 categories we're kind of grouping together and calling them EEFs. And that includes enzyme inhibitors, slow and controlled release fertilizers, biofertilizers, and nanofertilizers. So the projects have to have at least one of these technologies included for it to be in scope. Here is a list of required parameters that are of interest. So I already mentioned the fertilizer technologies we're interested in. We are focused on nitrogen or phosphorus. That's not to say you can't include other nutrients as well, but there has to be a nitrogen or a phosphorus component. For crop rotations, we're particularly interested in corn, soy, cotton, wheat, canola, potatoes, and tomatoes. This could include cover crops. It's not required, but it could. And then we are also interested in rotation, so not monoculture, basically. The list of countries here are the countries that both our US government and our member organizations are interested in. And for these, the research either has to take place in one of these countries or the research has to directly benefit one of these countries. And that could be through a similar cropping system, a similar climate, a similar soil condition. It just has to be justified in the proposal. And then lastly, for measurements, there has to be a measure of agronomic performance. So you have to measure yield or biomass to see how the fertilizer technology is performing to support the crop and its nutrition. There also has to be some measure of nutrient use efficiency or nutrient recovery. There's a variety of ways you can calculate that. We provide a reference link in the RFA to some examples. And then lastly, preference will be given to projects that are also taking measurements through environmental losses. So that could be losses via water, either leachate or runoff, and or greenhouse gas emissions, specifically ammonia volatilization and nitrous oxide. This is not required, as we understand this is an expensive and equipment-heavy component of a trial. However, a lot of these products are making environmental claims and we need data to support that. So we are very interested in these environmental measurements as well. So here's some additional information that should be included with your proposal, that is required to be included with your proposal. So we're really interested in knowing how the research that comes out of this, how it can benefit other locations other than just where the research take place. So we require a statement saying, what's the potential impact of this research in other locations, either regions or countries around the world. Next, you have to say how the proposed research builds upon existing knowledge. This is pretty common. You have to just explain why this is important. Next one is justification for location selection, methodology, and measurements. So why did you pick the location you did? Do you expect to see a crop response to fertilization? Things like that. And then lastly, a description of how you will be following the field trial guidelines for evaluating enhanced efficiency fertilizers. So as Allison said, this is a set of protocol guidelines that we put together over the last year, and it's recently published, open access, and we are requiring that all field trials that we fund through this program follow these guidelines. There is an additional set of information on the website of things that we would encourage you to include with your proposal. I don't have them all listed here, but please visit the website to read through those. That would be great. Okay. Now I have an extremely brief overview of the protocol. I'm not going to go through all of the tables here. I'll give some examples. But this is basically a minimum data set. So this paper lists the core information that you have to include if you're doing this type of research. It's really to help consistency. It's help to increase the impact of the data, to have a broader impact so that we can look at different data from different locations together. It can really improve the state of knowledge in this area. So the way we have it set up is it's a tiered framework. The little image here on the right shows what that framework is. So at the core, we have our experimental design and core metadata. So this is required of any trial, no matter where it's taking place, no matter what the objectives, you have to follow those guidelines. The second tier is crop and soil analysis. Of course, you have to collect crop and soil data, but the way in which you do that and the types of measurements may depend on the location or the cropping system, things like that. And then the outermost ring is environmental losses. Again, we're not requiring that these measurements be taken. However, it's extremely important if you're making environmental claims to collect that information. So if you have the capacity to measure greenhouse gases or losses via water, these tables should be followed. And then, of course, data stewardship is extremely important across the board. And the way this set of guidelines is set up is it's a series of tables. There's also important information in the text as well, but the tables are organized with a set of parameters and then whether or not they're required or recommended. Required information is required. It's necessary for the results to be meaningful. So that information has to be reported with your results. And the recommended information is desirable, but it could depend on the location in which you have the trial. It might depend on your accessibility to equipment and things. So they're a bit more, the recommended information is a bit more flexible depending on the study. And here I have the tables listed. There's 8 of them. We have experimental design, core metadata, soil data, crop data, and then 3 nutrient loss tables. So one for water, one for nitrous oxide, and one for ammonia volatilization, and then some data stewardship guidelines. So here is an example table. This is one of the biggest ones. It's for experimental design, and it's split into general information about your trial, treatment EEF information, your experimental controls, treatment fertilizer rates, and then replications and blocks. So we have the parameter on the left and whether or not it's required or recommended on the right. This one's very important, and we specify in the RFA that you have to describe the controls and the treatment rates that you're using. That's really essential to this exercise. Another table I just wanted to point out that's something that is becoming more popular and common, excitingly, is that we are requiring that the data sets themselves be published. So FAR requires that all results from FAR funded projects be published. However, through this exercise, we are also requiring that the data sets themselves be published in either a data repository or a data publication. So we encourage that you describe what you're going to do there in the proposal. Okay, so that's my overview. I have not been keeping an eye on the chat, so let me just stop sharing so I can look at the chat box here.
We have a number coming up. So one, I can read them out, Sarah, if that makes it easier. One
Yeah, I'm
question.
getting caught up.
Okay. From Janet Lewis, can the EEF product be a genetic innovation?
So good question. Let me share my screen again. So I have listed here. So this is the out of scope topics, and this is also located on the webpage. Unfortunately, anything crop breeding related is not included. I don't know if you meant crop genetics in the question, but crop genetics are not included in scope. We're looking at specifically fertilizer amendments. That's not to say that you couldn't have a component maybe that's a crop genetic, but we're really looking at fertilizer additives.
Um, all right, thank you. That's always very useful to look at the list of things that are out of scope for this particular initiative. The next question, David Yalin, do you encourage cross-country projects or do you prefer single-country projects?
So in the RFA, we do state that we would highly encourage collaborative projects. It certainly would not hurt to have multi-state or multi-country collaborations. It's not required, but we're really interested in seeing and generating data and seeing how some of these technologies work in different situations, different locations. So that would be great.
There's a related question that just popped up in the chat about whether a university in Trinidad and Tobago would be qualified or would need to work through another collaborator. So the way it's framed is the research needs to be conducted in and or relevant to the countries listed there. So it certainly is possible to do research in a country that is relevant across multiple geographies, right? If you're working in particular regions of the US Great Plains, for example, that may be very similar to cross-border areas in Canada. And so we encourage you to look for where your research location is most relevant for other cropping systems in other regions of the world and highlight that for us in the pre-proposal. I would say that one element of this is that projects are up to $1 million. We would expect the larger project proposals to come in to be collaborative across multiple countries, or to have other, quite detailed or quite broad relevance to other regions, right? So we are looking to reach as many regions as possible through this RFA. But so that's like the requirement there. So I think those were okay, and the next one, is this 100% research focused RFA? Is there funding for extension activities? Can the funds be used to conduct research on farmer fields or support demonstrations in later years?
So, I mean, we are very focused on field trials. Something that at least the FAR proposals I've been reading through, that's a really important component is outreach. So where would the results go and what would the results do? So I could see in this case, the results could go into feeding recommendation, land-grant university recommendations. I could see them being put towards extension events where you're educating farmers on what you've found. So I think Allison, I don't know if there's information about what the funding specifically would go to other than, sharing the results through extension activities.
I think this is primarily intended to be research, and research in the trial type of setting rather than on-farm research or extension. I mean, certainly we are interested in having connections to be able to get information out to producers on this, but we don't expect that to be a large component. Certainly a little bit of outreach is appropriate, but we want the bulk of the funding to be in the research component for this, I think. There's a couple of questions, I think, about proprietary. So I'll try and encapsulate multiples. One, is there an expectation that proprietary product formulations would be known and disclosed in the research? And then a related one, I think, somewhat about sorry, whether members of would preference be given to projects include products that are members of the consortium? Maybe address those as a pair.
Yeah, so one of the things about the products themselves, because we have been having discussions about what we do about proprietary information, but we are expecting that the products that come through will be, we kind of say that we want them to be commercially available. So the idea is that they're already available to farmers. Farmers could buy them tomorrow and use them on the field. Or very close to commercialization. So they've already gone through the preliminary steps in terms of mode of action, exploratory research and things. So, I would not say, Allison, please add to this if you think, but I think if something's so early on in development that it's so confidential, that might not be a good fit for this RFA. I think it has to be far enough along where you can share. Maybe it doesn't have the brand name, but it has the makeup and the mode of action and the label information that is required as part of the guidelines. Do you have anything to add to that, Allison?
Right. I think that is what we're looking for here. I think if you have a particular product that you think is appropriate but would have some potential IP considerations, that's something you could reach out to us individually about. We, FAR does have a long history of public-private partnerships and working with companies who have proprietary products and services and things. So we can discuss that maybe on a case-by-case basis. But yeah, since the objective is evaluating things that are commercially available, we're hoping to keep those issues to a minimum. I think in terms of the member products, there is not preference being given to products from our members themselves. No, so we're looking for diversity of products in those categories. Let's see. There's one specific question from Benjamin Ellert. What are the guidelines for isotopic tracing of fertilizer recovery by the crop? I realize we're jumping around between program and very specific science questions, so here's
Yeah. So that's a good question. We don't have specific guidelines for that. The protocol guidelines that we have are a bit more generalized. So we're not looking into like deep into specific methodologies and how they should be conducted. For that, I would, for when you are publishing your results, you have to reference what you're doing and how you're doing it. But we don't have a specific requirement for how to trace fertilizer recovery. We do need some measure of nutrient sufficiency or nutrient recovery, and there's some basic calculations you can use to do that. But no, we don't have specific guidelines for that. That's something you could either look to the literature or, what's commonly done in that field is appropriate.
Staying on the science side, the other question there, the dividing line between biofertilizers and those involving genetic manipulation can be rather gray. Do we have any clarification there?
So we give a definition, I have to pull that up. We give a definition for what we consider to be a biofertilizer. I don't know if we can pull that one up I don't want to misspeak. I think we're just mostly we're not looking at crop genetic manipulation, or we're not looking at seed treatments or things like that. We're looking at, a fertilizer product that's either a biofertilizer, nanofertilizer, enzyme inhibitor, controlled slow release. So a biofertilizer, an example would be, a live strain of nitrogen fixing bacteria that is an inoculation that you apply to the root zone. So we do give a definition there, and it's included in the paper as well. And it's one of those things where if you think it's in scope, you just when you submit your pre-proposal, you just provide a justification for why you think it meets that requirement.
Great. And there's a couple of questions here related to scale. So is there an acreage target or scale of field trial that's expected, and any preferences for conducting trials with university extension programs versus large corporate partners versus farmers directly?
Yeah, that's a good question. In terms of scale, as long as it's, appropriate scientifically. So we are looking for replicated plot level trials. So we're not looking for whole field evaluations. And the size of the plot will depend on the space available and the location you're at. So we don't have any specific size guidelines. Depending on the type of product you use and where you're applying it. We do give some buffer guidelines there, which could dictate how big the plots are as well. Because some of these products might have some transportation issues in the soil. But yeah, no specific guidelines there as long as it's a replicated plot-based trial. And in terms of who you're working with, we're always interested in interesting collaborations. I think if you have a diverse team with interesting perspectives, that could be helpful. If we do ask you to justify, why you're choosing the product you're choosing. And if you say you've had conversations with farmers and they're really curious about that product, I think that's a great thing to look into. But we don't have specific requirements of the types of collaborations you should come in with.
Um, sorry, my Q&A is moving around. Okay, is there a preference for projects that go into depth at a limited number of sites? So, for example, measuring environmental losses in one site per year for a few years versus projects that are just doing the yield and the nutrient use efficiencies on over a larger area, multiple sites in multiple years.
That is a great example of some of the trade-offs with funding availability and resources. And we've had this discussion, and this is exactly why we're not requiring the environmental loss measurements, because we understand you can do a lot more, you could get a lot more bang for your buck if you just are doing yield and UE research. So, we are looking at both. Yeah, I mean, I think you can get value information from both. A lot of that will also depend on what your objectives are. If you're saying, you want to see if this product has a potential to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions, you're going to have to measure greenhouse gas emissions. Whereas if you're just looking at, whether or not a type of product supports yield, and if you can apply less to get the same yield, that would be a different story. So I would say, think about what your resources are. You can do a combination. But that's exactly why we made the environmental loss component optional, because we do see the value in those trials that are just the yield component as well.
Great. Okay.
Yeah, a lot of this just depends.
And there is a question here, a broad question of would it be possible to get feedback once you draft an idea? And the answer is we are open to conversation. So if you have an idea and you don't know if it's in scope, we can certainly have a conversation with you about whether or not that is in scope. So you can send an email to Sarah through the RFA, and we can give you feedback on whether or not a specific topic or idea is in scope via email or a brief call. So please let us know. They're on that topic, two somewhat different questions, but one is whether nanoparticle research would be considered, and the other is whether this would be relevant for agrivoltaics.
Okay, the nanoparticle, I mean, so nanofertilizers are in scope. Again, they have to have some, preliminary research, either with greenhouse lab or initial field studies showing, that they have potential. There has to be some baseline research there, and they have to be either commercially available or extremely close to being commercially available. So we're not doing kind of the more foundational research here. We're doing it more once it's basically ready to be used by a farmer. I don't know if that answers that question. And then I did not get that other
So it's just the
word you
question
said.
is whether I know there's a lot of movement in the Q&A as we're getting there, but whether agrivoltaics would be relevant. And I think in that case, that could be part of the research. We have not done a lot of agrivoltaic research here at FAR. I know it's relatively novel. I don't know that there's a lot of experimentation with agrivoltaics in the cropping systems we're looking at. So it would need to meet the other requirements as well, of course, meeting, the crops that are in scope, for example. But I think that might be a case where if you have an example in that area, you want to conduct these trials in a research location with those crops that has agrivoltaics installed or experimenting with them, we could consider that potentially. Another one here specific to fertilizer rates, are there any guidelines for reporting the precision of fertilizer application rate, like 90 kilograms per hectare, plus or minus 10 or plus or minus 1? Like, is there certainty range, I guess?
Yeah, so I mean, something it's an endless conversation in the soil fertility space about how to identify the optimum rate. And, it's so variable. It's dependent on a lot of different factors. And that's why in the protocol, we recommend a range of fertilizer rates. We're not expecting perfection here, but ideally you would have the proper controls are required, and then you have to ideally have at least 1 to 2 suboptimal rates, the expected optimal, and then above optimal, because that really helps us nail down what the optimal rate is. Um, yeah, I mean, it's hard to get it exactly precise, and it really depends on the trial setup, but that range of rates is really important there.
I'm just going down the list. So one question here, do we have specific product recommendations? I would say we don't have specific products here. What I would encourage is look at the geography you're most interested in the cropping system and get feedback from producers or producer groups or companies in that area. What products are they considering? What might be for sale? What products are they experimenting with already in that are relevant for your system? I think that's the most important thing for us is whether these are relevant in the region and the cropping system that's being explored. That's the main criteria.
Yeah, and also targeting products that, target the nutrient loss or the issue at stake. If it's a really dry area, maybe, some of the leaching or run, it depends on the nutrient loss pathways where you're doing it, and picking products that target those nutrient loss pathways is an important consideration.
Um, okay, one here, are there any new techniques are new techniques that can optimize EEF utilization considered here? I think is that in scope. So techniques, I assume, is in practices that can optimize the efficiency of the EEF.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the top one here is the impact of stacking EEFs, and that could be one or multiple EEF with management practices. So the management practice at which it's applied, or that could be tillage, that could be cover crops, that could be other things. That's certainly in scope.
Okay.
In terms of measurement, I don't think this is measurement techniques. This sounds more like field management practices. If so, yes, that's in scope.
Um, So there's a couple of questions. Okay, so one regarding fertilizing pastures or wheat used as pasture, for example, in semi-arid areas where the product is fodder or direct grazing. Is that included in the funding? I'd say refer back to the crop list. I think we are not explicitly looking for research on animal production systems. If it's producing a crop that's in that list for fodder, I think that would certainly be in scope. If it's exclusively for grazing, I think that would likely be considered out of scope for this effort. Um, let's see. Again, on the agrivoltaic piece, again, the same kind of answer. Look at the cropping systems there. I think, exploring the use of these products in that system it would be in scope so long as it meets the other scope requirements that are there. Let's see. Or improve composting processes within the scope, Sarah.
So no, so here we have a list. The fourth bullet down is a list of products that are not in scope. They can be in addition to the products that we have. So these products may be combined with the identified EFs of interest. However, they cannot be the only product that you're looking at. So this would include compost and manure. So they can be in the trial. We're not saying they are not allowed, but you have to have at least one of the products categories that we have listed.
They should not be focused on those organic derived amendments. One here on would letters of support, cooperating interest in the work and technology be allowed or encouraged? Absolutely. Letters of support are always welcome. We work to build partnerships. So if you have partners who are very interested in the research, whether or not they're providing support financially, but yes, we love to hear if there's interest in this from multiple parties. Will this be an annual RFP from the consortium? Currently, we are planning to do a second RFA, but the scope may change. So there may not be an annual process. So we do intend for there to be a second round, but the scope might change slightly. So keep that in mind. And then one last one I see here. So Benjamin Ellert in Western Canada is trying to gauge the relative merits of a Trans-Canada project covering diversity of climates versus an international project, potentially with looking in the US, Canada, Great Plains, which would be a narrow range of climates, but international. So I guess is there a relative merit of those approaches?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if we could say we have a preference for one or the other of those. I think, the broader the impact internationally, the better, but I wouldn't say, and I think collaborative projects in general is helpful. Having a range of climates you're looking at is helpful, but it depends on the questions you're asking as well. We're not trying to tell you what exactly to do. We're just trying to give you the things that were kind of in general of interest. So I don't know. I wouldn't say we prefer one of those over the other.
Right.
I also
And
wanted to
last one.
say with this one, we are looking to fund multi-year trials, so minimum of 2 years.
Yeah.
I didn't mention that, but
Yes. So one question here, I know the RFA covers row crops as well as specialty crops like tomatoes. Is there a preference for projects which focus on larger commodity crops in acreage like corn or soy, or projects that explore performance across a diversity of crops?
um, that's a bit more location specific. This is such an international project, and so, for the US, certainly corn and soy is like, those are the most prolific acreage wise in the US, but we're looking all around the world. So, depending on the location, I would say what's the most impactful and helpful for that location, where the trial's taking place.
Um, And that was a lot of questions. I see 39 here have been answered. I know Marina has been in the chat as well from our grants team answering some of those questions. A few more popping up. I don't know if you want to also go to the slide with the links, Sarah, just to kind of put
Yeah,
up
just those
their
up. Thank
link
you.
information. Um, So are there any preferences on short versus long-term effects of fertilizer products in terms of carryover effects of P or N?
Yeah, one of the main topics of interest is nutrient carryover effects. That's a big question with especially some of the products that say that they hold on to nutrients, longer. So, but short-term effects in terms of how they impact yield and the losses during that growing season are extremely important. And then what happens when they carry over to the next season? Both of those are very important.
Great. Um, then there's a question, how would you consider projects that reduce compaction and improve nitrogen fixation? I would say that the target is not nitrogen fixation in this. Again, projects need to meet all of the criteria in the RFA. If you're also looking at practices with equipment that does reduce compaction and evaluating how that influences the soil nutrient cycling, that's certainly in scope, but it does still need to meet all the other requirements, including using the products that are listed in the RFA. There's a data and modeling question. So is there intention to use the combined data for modeling and validation and ensure all data inputs as acquired for certain models? Do you want to address that?
I can start, but you're a modeling expert, Allison. Maybe you can go ahead and take that one.
I mean, I would just say we are not targeting improving a particular model with all of the data, but one of the goals of the protocol is to start generating a body of research and literature following standard procedures in terms of how the research has been conducted so that the data can be synthesized, whether that's used in meta-analyses across multiple projects and regions, for example, or whether that's used in modeling. Those are both potential outcomes of the research. We as a consortium are not intending right now to fund any specific model development, but again, the use of the protocol, part of the reason for that is really adhering to the data collection standards, and so that we can do that synthesis work down the line as we build up this body of research.
Yeah, and we did have a couple modelers review the protocol and give us some feedback too. So we've kept them in the loop, and they've given us some helpful feedback to make sure we're collecting what we need to.
And then one question about scaling. So how important is technology transfer? Will FAR assist in scaling up successful EEF innovations? And the answer there is largely no. Our role is in the R&D and the research space in demonstrating how the product is performing and identifying the solutions. But in terms of scaling, building out a business and things like that, that FAR typically does not invest in that kind of activity. I think we're slowing down again on the Q&A. The emails are here, so feel free to reach out to Sarah. My email conveniently is not on this list, but you can actually find it on the FAR website. So you're welcome to email me as well if you have questions regarding the scope or the content. Again, we can certainly provide feedback on the scope, whether an idea is in or out of scope. So please keep that in mind. If you have any challenges or issues accessing the application, that grants@foundationfar.org is the best place to go. You'll hear back quickly from our team on how to address any challenges you're having. I think one question I've seen a couple times pop up quickly in the chat is the indirect cost. Yes, the indirect cost limit for FAR is 10%. So I don't know, Marina, it says is IDC, is it 10% total direct costs?
Yeah, I need to pop in. It is 10% of the total project costs.
Okay.
So if you get funded for that full $1 million, 100,000 of those dollars will be IDC or be eligible to be IDC, and the remaining 900,000 would be directed towards direct costs. So it's a slightly different breakdown than many other places do it.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. A couple more things have popped in. So let's see. How would data from this project be used in the broader context of advancing agricultural practices, policy development, or industry innovations? That's a question, I think, for the scientific community, as we are funding this area of the research. We certainly hope that, again, as I mentioned, be used to inform models, to be used to inform meta-analyses that are addressing some of these larger questions about programs, policies, private sector programs, assisting farmers in making changes in their operating systems. So we certainly hope that, but this project, this specific RFA, is not funding that type of translational research. We're funding the trial-based research here. See, are there plans to standardize materials? For example, all studies using nitroprion obtain it from the same source? And I think the answer is probably no to that. Sarah?
No, in the guidelines, we do require that, I think it's required that we, where you got the material from and the data was produced and how it was handled, like all that kind of information should be included, so that there's some consistency there, and you can maybe identify some differences. But no, we're not requiring researchers to get materials from the same location.
Thank you. Let's see, things keep popping up and we're keeping everybody engaged here. So pre-proposal does not require an estimated budget. Is that correct?
Not correct. The pre-proposal does require an estimated budget.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, there is typically some leeway. You don't need to be precise down to the dollar.
You don't need to submit the form, spreadsheets with detailed budgets throughout, all the categories and so on. But we do need to have a sense of the scale of the project. What does your intended budget look like for the proposal? With regards to summer 2025 award notification, do you think notification will come early enough to run field trials in the US next year? So 2026 would be the most realistic first year. Yes, 2026 would be the first trial year for the US.
Yeah, I mean, there is a chance. I guess it also just depends. Sometimes these things take a long time, but potentially fall 2025 if there's some fall treatments or fall management things that you have to get started, or if we're funding things in the Southern Hemisphere, it depends. But I think realistically, early 2026 would be a good game plan.
Mm-hmm. Great. We'll really appreciate all the questions, high level, detailed. Hopefully people have a better idea now of what this opportunity is and some of the requirements and recommendations and so on. And this recording will be available if you need to come back and check anything, and share it with any colleagues who weren't able to be here. But yes, again, please just let us know if you have questions as you go through this, and we're looking forward to seeing all of the great proposals that come from this group and others. Thank you.
Thank you so much.